Hi, my name is Pete Wilson. I'm one of the pastors here at Crosspoint Church in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's very humbling to have this opportunity to talk to you guys today. I've been thinking and praying about what I would want to talk to church leaders about, and I think there's a lot of different crises in the church that we could address. I know some people believe there's a crisis of attendance in the church, that church attendance is certainly trending downward in America. But I think the greatest crisis for me these days in the church is what I would call a crisis of transformation, in that people are going to church, but they're not really changing. People are attending our programs, but there's not a lot of transformation happening. In other words, people aren't becoming more Christ-like. They're not becoming more loving of God and loving of other people. You can look at studies that kind of compare Christians and non-Christians, and across the board there's very little difference between Christians and non-Christians in major areas of life, such as finances and relationships. And so there seems to be this crisis, a transformation that's just kind of taken place. And I think there's probably a lot of reasons for this, but I think one of the reasons has to be because as church leaders, we have not done a sufficient job of casting vision for the kind of life that God's called us to. We've reduced spiritual transformation, or at least measuring spiritual transformation, down to such things as church attendance or knowledge, and not basing it on loving God and loving other people. And so I think as church leaders, we've got to do a better job at this. We need to help people understand that they're not just being saved from something when they cross the line of faith, but they're being saved to something. It was Jesus, Matthew 16:24, that said, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." So he says, I want you to follow me. In other words, I have this life for you. I want you to do life in a certain way. I want you to accept this invitation to walk as I walk and to live as I live. And so there's this aspect that I think we need to help people to learn how to trust in Jesus. Not just trust him for our salvation, but to actually trust him with our life. As an interesting story, I think a lot of times one of the best examples of people following in my life is my kids, because they have a certain trust for me as their father, and so often when I ask them to do something, they just do it. And when things are working the way they should be working, they don't even really ask questions. And so not too long ago, we were at the pool. I have 3 boys, 8, 5, and a 3-year-old, and my middle son has been potty trained for a couple years now, but we were at the pool, and he comes to me and he says, "Dad, I really need to go pee." Now, let me explain this. I was being a lazy father in this moment. I was reading a book that I was really into, and so I just kind of said, "Gage, come here. Why don't you just pee in the pool?" Like, and I don't make a habit out of this. All right, don't judge me because you've probably done it yourself. But I said, "Gage, just go pee in the pool." And so I go back to reading my book so that I didn't have to take him to the bathroom. And then like 30 seconds later, I hear all these gasps all around the pool, and I look up from my book to find my son standing next to the pool, peeing into the pool. So I run over there and I'm like, "Gage, no, you can't do this, son." Now by now, like, every eye is on us in the pool. Nobody's talking, everybody's quiet. And Gage says, "Well, Dad, you told me to go pee in the pool." So it's like he just does what it is that I ask him to do because he trusts me. And I think as leaders, we got to begin to help our people understand what spiritual transformation really looks like, is to trust what it is that Jesus really said. Dallas Willard, I think, is one of the most brilliant minds when it comes to spiritual transformation and what spiritual transformation looks like. He uses this little thing called VIM, V-I-M. The V stands for vision, the I stands for intention, and the M stands for method. This is brilliant, and I use this often when I'm writing messages. I use this when we're thinking about programming here at Crosspoint, and because I think we have to create a pathway for people if they want true spiritual transformation. And so let me just walk through this real quick. I know we just have a minute, but the V stands for vision. And we begin to help people understand the kind of life that God's called them to. A guy by the name of Greg Hawkins kind of wrote and talked about this idea, used a rubber band to say one end of the rubber band kind of represents God's vision for our life. This is who God, thought of when he, thought you into existence, when he created you. On the other side, we have reality, where your life is today. And we would all have to admit that there's at least a small gap in between who it is that God's called us to be and where we currently are in our life. And so you have this gap. And in the world that we live in, we're kind of simultaneously pulled in two different directions, right? Because believers, we're pulled towards this vision that God has for our life. And as we read the Gospels, the kind of life that we could have that's full of love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. On the other hand, we have current reality. So we're pulled in both of these directions. And anytime you have tension, tension cries to be released. So you have one of two options here. Either God's vision for your life gets pulled back closer to the current reality where you are right now, or current reality comes closer to the life that God has for you. Okay? And when that happens, that's what spiritual transformation is. As leaders, we have to help our people begin to understand this vision that God has for them. That's the V. The I is intention, and that means that we have to help them learn to own their own spiritual life. Often I think in our churches, our people have way too much dependence on either the pastor, the message, programming within the church, and they haven't really learned to own their own spiritual life. And so as leaders, I would challenge us to say, have we really stepped up before the people that God's entrusted us to lead and said, you got to own your own spiritual life? Have we stepped up and said to them, hey, the Christian life is more than your ego-driven, self-centered, materialistic life. That following Christ is worth it, and trusting Him is worth it, and it's better to live a life for Christ than to live a life with everything that this world has to offer, but to be separated for Him. So that's the intention. And then the M stands for method, and that's helping our people begin to understand that there's a certain rhythm, there was a certain method to Jesus' life. And so when He says, I want you to follow me, when He says, I want you to trust me, it means that He has a certain way of life that we can begin to follow. If you look at His life, there's patterns of prayer. There's patterns of pulling away from the noise of the world. There's patterns of community. There's certain patterns in His life. And as leaders, we've got to begin to help our people understand that there is this way of life. John 15, Jesus said, abide in me. He said, I'm the vine and you are the branches. To the degree that you abide in me or that you remain in me, you're going to produce fruit. But apart from me, you can do nothing. So spiritual transformation is helping our people begin to see that they remain in Christ. They abide in Him from one moment to the next moment to the next. And I believe as leaders, if we can have a greater intentionality about helping our people understand spiritual transformation, we can begin to take a look at how we can overturn this crisis that we have in the church today, this crisis of transformation.